Hello and welcome to The Real Show. My name is Murray. I'm with my co-host Corey.
Hello.
Hello, and today we're bringing you a new guest, a new interview. Yes, that's right, we've got a special guest from the world of cinema. It's the director of Tear Me Apart and The Adjustment and several other short films. It's Alex Lightman. Alex Lightman is going to talk to us about his new film and video game, an FMV interactive media experience, Nightbook, brought to you from Wales Interactive and Good Game Media. Nightbook comes out on all the platforms, PS4, Xbox One and Nintendo Switch on July 27th. So I hope you enjoy the interview with him. We talked to him for about an hour about everything from his feature film to his short films and his involvement in directing this very unique story. So we hope you enjoy. First of all, I think the first thing to say is congratulations on Nightbook. It's tremendous success. The best of words. Congratulations. It's amazing. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
Yes. Of course, the first thing I'd like to ask is what was your main influences? What did you sort of draw from when you put the pen to paper and thought, I'm going to create this interactive cinematic experience, this game? Where did that sort of come from for you?
I was brought on to direct. I didn't write it. Megan Jones wrote it, and she has some experience with being an interpreter. And there's obviously lots of great opportunities in the interactive space for difficult decisions surrounding how you interpret or translate someone. And the producer John also identified that there was also a really great opportunity for some really nice, difficult ethical dilemmas to come out of interactive. But I was brought on during sort of the development process, I guess, to sort of help shape the story. And the thing that really attracted me to it was the idea that at the very core of it, you've got, a woman who's just trying to do what she believes is best for her family. And she's just desperately trying to keep everything in control. Whether or not she's successful at that is another matter. But I guess for me, my references really came more out of the movie world than the games world, being a film director, or coming from being a film director into the game space. And I know it's it's always quite an obvious reference, and everyone aspires to this when they make a horror film. But The Shining was a really great reference for me, namely because I feel like that's about what people do to each other to hurt each other, rather than an abstract other entity. I think it's all about like what we're capable of, the horror within, rather than the horror coming from outside. So that was the thing that really drew me to it. Yeah.
And how did you find that? How did you find that directing experience? How did that sort of course, you're working with people like Colin Salmon and the other actors. How did you find, especially during lockdown, how did you find that directorial experience working with these actors and being sort of on set, as it were? I use air quotes for that, but how did you find that experience?
It was pretty wild. I'm currently sat in the room where I was on set, in inverted commas, for the whole of production. I mean, everyone on this, all the actors and crew and everyone were amazing, because we were shooting in very unusual circumstances. The camera gear was sent out to the actors. They had to set it up themselves. Obviously we helped guide them do that. They had to set up their own lights. Colin, bless him, completely overtook a room in the back of his garden, spent a week doing all the art design and everything. Like, he really went to town. It was fantastic. So yeah, I was just so lucky to have a great cast who were really excited about the format of it being interactive, up for the challenge, and also really excited to kind of get stuck in and take on roles that they wouldn't usually have to do. You don't usually have to be their own clapper loader or their own sound person or any of this stuff. So that was really cool. And what people don't tell you is the secret to getting really good performances out of good actors is to just hire really good actors. I mean, that helps considerably. So No, they were a real pleasure and honor to work with, and the enthusiasm and energy they brought every day was amazing. So in that sense, it made my job quite easy in some ways.
Yeah, it must have. It's really good to have a cast that sort of gels together, and you find that they sort of, you find it works quite naturally when you have people who are in the role, and it feels right and it looks right as well. And especially things like, I know set design, especially in lockdown, you can't always control, but you find like you said, Colin Salmon, Carl Vito is in this sort of workshop area, and there's paintings and drawings all behind him, and Loralyn's dad's room is covered wall to wall in the very sort of sketchy designs as well. There's very horror style, and I think that's a real testament to what you've achieved. So congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it as well, it was pretty crazy because when we were casting for it, we had no idea what these people's houses were going to be like, right? And that's where they were shooting, and we had to match, for example, Alexis, who was played by Mark. We can get Loralyn's father in the story. You know, we cast Julie Dray as Loralyn, and she was in Paris in a flat with white walls and a sloped ceiling and all the rest of it. And then we were like, right, okay, well, we've got to match this to someone who we haven't got yet. And they could live in, you know, a Versailles-like palace for all we know. Who knows? And Mark was great. We got very lucky, you know, really, because he had a room that had a sloped ceiling, which I think really sells it. And covering the walls obviously helps a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, matching those spaces was fun and games. But yeah, I think we got. Let's put it this way: we're quite lucky at the moment that white walls are on trend. It's a nice blank canvas. If we were back in, like, imagine being in the 70s or something, where everyone has floral wallpaper, it might have been a different
story there. But still, it's you mentioned the format, and that's one thing that the game really sells itself on, is the sort of the choose your own adventure style, which has been brought on by a lot of mediums. But the way it's done in Nightbook, I find particularly interesting, because it definitely brings up the tension. It's definitely, there's and every choice has consequences, that butterfly effect. How did you find that would sort of shape the story while you were directing?
It's a lot to hold in your head.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you can imagine. It was really important to us that every decision you make, like you said, does matter. And, you know, working with Goodgate Media and Wells Interactive, that's something, you know, they're beginning to really understand about these FMVs, and that's what really, I think, elevates them above, you know, being a story where you have some decisions to, you know, a story where your decisions matter, where there is a sort of element of success or failure for the player. And I think that's where the games thing comes in versus film. You know, you can't win a film. But you can win a game, or as such as the idea, or fail a game, or, you know, or everything in between. But holding it in our heads and having it all charted out beforehand was challenging, because of course sometimes you might have come from something awful having happened, and that scene has to obviously work from a performance perspective to be coherent with that. So, you know, that same moment might be played out slightly differently because you've come on from a kind of minor success that your characters had. So it was trying to balance all these different routes and different eventualities, so that every path you play is a coherent and, you know, fulfilling and, you know, emotionally building story, so that you have a you know, great story whatever way you go, whether you are successful or not, in inverted commas. Was super important to me. Hopefully we've managed it, but it is a headache.
Yes,
format.
It must be. Before I pass over to my co-host Corey for a minute, I'm just going to inquire about the post-production process, because with a video game and even with a film, it takes quite a while to develop and get everything set up. So I'm sure you had quite the team of editors. What was that like, overseeing that process?
Again, it was pretty wild because I've never met my editor in person. You know, like ever, and that's a very close relationship. Alex, and her name was Alex as well, which was confusing. But she was amazing. She really took on the challenges of it. It was a really difficult edit because we really went for it with the user interface and the story taking place on a computer screen, which added a whole other dimension to it. And we had a very fast turnaround, but she was just brilliant. And yeah, trying to keep track of everything, trying to keep things consistent, making sure that when you go from one clip to the next, it would work. I mean, she is the complete unsung hero of this movie. Like, she really went above and beyond. And she did such fantastic. I cannot speak highly enough about the editor. She really just took it and ran with it. And she was great. So it was tough. And then doing all the music remotely and all the visual effects remote, everything was remote. And it was kind of interesting. Like, there was nothing about this film that was normal. Nothing. But that's great. And I think that's really cool because it just shows you that what is normal. There's a lot of sort of assumptions we make as filmmakers about how things should be done and how we should do things. And I think what this has taught me is that, is that always the right way of doing it? Is that always the best way of doing it? Not necessarily. Yeah. Sometimes, yes, but not necessarily. So it was it was a really fascinating process and a real honor to be part of it, especially at a time when, not a lot of people were struggling to do things. So I felt very privileged to be able to be making a film.
Yeah, it must have been very unique, definitely.
For sure.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask, because it's something that I find somewhat interesting, and if I'm wrong, correct me, but I believe, first off, Kannar is made as in a language you made yourself. It's not a thing that exists, right?
That's correct. Yeah, the writer came up with Kannar. Yeah, absolutely.
How was it, not only, I guess, coming up with it, but then also having to implement something that's not actually a thing into the film? I mean, like, because also, I guess, there are other things out there, because I think we kept seeing, I can't remember what it's called actually, the Kannada, the Indian thing, we kept seeing it kept popping up.
Yeah, we did some research into this.
Yeah, there's other languages that are like, or like other alphabets. What was it like kind of making your own, and why did you decide to make your own one rather than kind of go with one that already existed?
And how was it like, what was it like working with that sort of thing? Like, obviously you mentioned that the writer was an interpreter, and it came from that sort of influence, the French translation and the French interpretation. But how was it working with a language that was completely fictional? That must have been quite a challenge.
It sounds very hard, but in some ways it's quite easy because you become the de facto, expert on how to pronounce words in a made-up language, right? So whatever I said was the right way of pronouncing it. Well, that's what it was. So yeah, I became the kind of like, well, I'm going to. I mean, we wrote it out phonetically, of course.
Yeah.
And the writer had ideas about how that was pronounced because she wrote grammar for it. There was grammar. It was amazing. And it was kind of loosely based around French to some extent, but the way she wrote it was based on languages that use images for their words rather than sounds, which was very cool. Which we kind of came up with as the de facto experts in that language. Kannar, of course, is French for duck, which was our little in-joke with ourselves, which is terribly funny. But yeah, no, it was really cool because you just kind of run with it and you go like, well, I'm the expert in Kannar, and as long as everyone's sounding the same and saying the right words, it was good. And I think it's quite kind of liberating in some ways, because it's sort of, you make of it what you need it to be for the story rather than getting bogged down in the right way of saying things.
Yeah.
And of course, anything in French was really simple because we had a fluent French speaker on the other end of the phone.
Yeah, but that was definitely a very unique part of the game. The whole exploratory and the book itself, the night book itself, that came from a place where there's a lot of ancient scriptures, and I'm very much into that whole sort of sort of tribal world where everything is sort of the ancient languages and ancient societies and that sort of stuff. How did you feel sort of taking that on, this sort of horror thriller type thing, in that sort of the genre itself?
Good. I think I was really determined to make something that hit what it was. So I know it sounds obvious, but like really deliver on it being a horror film. That was really important to me. I wanted to make sure that people experiencing the game were, are fulfilled when they click into the game and they go on and they load it up. They're getting a really fun, entertaining, and scary, experience. And that was my kind of guiding principle. It was, what is an audience going to relate to? What are they going to understand? What are they going to like? And that's what's so wonderful about. I was to say, I hope we achieve that. But what is so wonderful about games as opposed to a movie is because you are so directly, interacting with your audience. You really cannot get away with anything. You really have to keep your audience kind of front and center. And I know that's kind of obvious, but in a film, there's always bits where you see it in films when the kind of the filmmaker takes over a little bit from time to time. It's the filmmaker being indulgent, which is cool. There's room for that too, and self-expression, and a lot. That's great. I just think in games, because people are so, they're participating directly with what the story you're telling, there's less room for that, but that opens you up to being, to really honoring and respecting and delivering something for your audience, which I think is really healthy as a creative person.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you've mentioned you've done films before and you've done this, especially with it being lockdown and you can't kind of meet up, you can't do the same thing before. First off, again, you did The Complex, right?
Yes. Paul Rashid, who directed Complex, they were on set.
Yeah, how different is it when you're doing another like interactive thing, being on set and being off set? Is there things that are easier or harder or that sort of thing?
Well, I've never been on set shooting an interactive, so I would imagine. I mean, look, every film project, whether it be interactive or otherwise, comes with its challenges. They are unique and specific to the project you're working on. One day you might have setting someone on fire and jumping out of a building, and that comes with its own set of challenges to being in an interactive format. I think the thing that was difficult, particularly as a director, was that you lose all your non-verbal communication. So sort of techniques and tactics I would employ to get the best out of people, which are non-verbal, how you carry yourself, how you sit in relation to people, your body language. You just don't have any of it. You just don't have it. You just have your head and your shoulders. So you have to be very specific about your direction verbally. You can't even point at something. You can't even go like, can you just go stand over there? Like, you just can't do it. So you just have to be very specific, very patient. And of course, you can't really help anyone with anything physical. You can't, if someone's trying to pick something up, or you can't make them a cup of tea. You can't do any of that. So there were times where someone might be struggling with something, to fix something or prep something or wire something up, and you kind of sat there going, well, I would love to come and help you right now, but I can't. So I'm just going to sit here and patiently offer you moral support. But that is a big challenge, because I think that's a huge part of building a team, on a film set is that environment of being able to help and communicate and all the rest of it, which you sort of lose, although you find a way.
And while we've got you here, can we talk about Tear Me Apart for a bit?
Yeah, sure.
because I know how bad. Well, not how bad. I know how challenging, let's say, a feature film is to make.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it was more than 4 years ago now that Tear Me Apart came out. But what was that like? How long did that take you? What was that experience like of directing like a major feature film? How did that sort of shape your experiences when you were directing other projects, especially Nightbook?
Well, first of all, it's very nice of you to call it a major feature film. I will take that to the bank.
Yes.
No, it was a challenge. It was very ambitious. We did it on a shoestring. We all decamped to Cornwall. We shot over 25 days. We were running and gunning. We were very lucky with the weather, as you can see from the film. It was, I think, the hottest summer that Cornwall had for 10 years or something like that. The producer, I think, was doing a rain dance every night, sacrificing various animals to make sure that happened. But yeah, no, it was an amazing experience, very challenging, and it was a real kind of baptism of fire, really, for making a movie. I mean, so we shot that in I think it was 25 days, or we were at least down there for 25 days, whether or not we were shooting every day or not, I can't really remember now. But Nightbook was shot in 10 days.
Yeah. What was that shift like? Because I know you made short films before, but going to a first hour and a half long film, that must have been, I can't imagine, must have been havoc. What was it? How would you rate the change, to say?
It's like running a marathon rather than a sprint. With a short film, you can kind of, and music videos are done quite a lot of as well. You kind of duck in, get as much as you can, hope for the best, try not to upset too many people on the way, and come out and you've got a thing. With a feature film, you've got a long time. It's just more of a sustained thing. You hit more of a rhythm, I think, with a feature film. As a director, you kind of slip into a rhythm, which takes you a bit of time to get, but once you're in it, that's what you're trying to keep moving forward. It is very different. You're also holding a lot more in your head, and you've got to make sure that you are telling, I mean, it sounds obvious, but telling the story really clearly across a long period. And whereas with a short film, you might go like, well, we shot this scene yesterday that is the next scene from the scene we shot today. Dog. There he goes. So you're trying to hold that in your head. But if that's one thing, but if you shoot a scene that follows on from a scene you shot 3 weeks ago, that's a whole different challenge. So yeah, it's very different. But also shooting interactives, you have to shoot very, very fast. You have a lot more material to cover in a short amount of time. So that's a different challenge again. You have to be, quick on your feet, make fast decisions, confident in what you're doing. But yeah, Tear Me Apart was an interesting mix of ignorance and arrogance, I think, being a young director, like going for it. And I think, learn an awful lot. And I just think you get better every time you make one.
Yeah. Is there any, I wonder if you could let us into this, was there any sort of, obviously Nightbook deals with a lot of heavy topics of possession and death, but was there any fun moments? Was there any fun moments when you were just sat and recording and taking the lines? And was there any sort of moments of tensions that were lifted?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I really believe that it is a privilege to make a film, and it's a real honor to be able to work in this industry and make a living, essentially playing make-believe. And it's really important to me that, yes, like, filmmaking is hard and it is also serious, and you have to get the work done, but you can have fun doing it. And we should remember that it's not, we're not creating vaccines for pandemics here. We're creating entertainment. So I think it's important to keep these things in perspective and enjoy ourselves and take moments to go, hey, this is really fun. And I've just called a focus pull from you know, the UK that's being remote operated via Yorkshire to Paris, like stuff like that. You know, it's amazing. This, what a privilege. So I like to keep that in perspective, because I think it's all too easy as a filmmaker to kind of, get a bit lost in your own kind of self-importance if you're not careful.
Is there anything you've learned on the change from, obviously you talked about this with Tear Me Apart, but is there anything you've learned on the change from like music videos, short films, the feature film, and now into this sort of interactive sort of video game space almost?
I mean, yeah, just I think with interactives, what it's taught me about storytelling has been fascinating. Like, you really have to know your stuff when it comes to stories, because it's not like you can't really just rely on the writer to have figured it out and you execute it in one go, and you kind of go, well, look, if I shoot it, it'll work, more or less. You really have to understand where you are in the story. What is this beat about from a storycraft perspective? Because I might be doing that beat in 3 or 4 different ways. So if I'm at a midpoint of a story, well, yeah, fine, the midpoint's a midpoint. But if I'm doing that in 3 different ways, I have to identify that these are all midpoints. They're all doing the same thing structurally for the story, and therefore they each need to be treated like a midpoint. Yeah, so that stuff's fascinating, and you know, understanding the structure of storytelling and applying that to then a branching narrative is just like amazing. I mean, the thought of doing a linear film now is like, wow, that would be really easy. Of course it wouldn't be easy, but you know,
especially with that, as you said, that almost non-linear narrative of the branching paths. And do you think that was that difficult to cover in a way where I go, right, okay, Loralyn has to make this decision, but if she goes this way, this happens, and this has to happen. But if she goes this way, this happens, and then Jess has this scene with this character. And do you think that was, how was that to sort of to cover and to direct especially?
It was kind of weird, because often when you know, if you shoot something linear, you'll do another take, right? And you go, that was great, let's do another take, cool. In this case, it was great, that was really good, let's do another take. But also, can you say different lines this time? Which was confusing. There were lots of very long and protracted conversations over which hand someone was holding something in.
Oh yeah.
Based on where they'd come from and what they were doing previously. You know, where we were two of us, well, certainly the crew, really getting into it, like, right, where, so she was here, she did this, she had a phone in that hand, and then we did. And Julie, to her credit, was unbelievable at her own continuity. I mean, I don't understand how she did it, because she'd be holding all of that in her head and smashing out truthful, amazing performances, take after take after take, and doing her own camera stuff, and not having anyone there to, you know, she was amazing. But yeah, it's certainly a challenge to hold all that in your head.
Yeah, that's very interesting, especially because the actors sort of on their own in the same way that you are, where you have to, like, they have to know what to do and where to stand and where they were standing and what they were holding. So it must have been, again, you speak on this sort of collaborative effort, even though you're in different places. Do you think that, there was any, obviously you mentioned that you can't really support people on set, but there are ways to still direct through that medium. So what did you think of that experience for you?
I mean, in some ways, there's some things about it that were very similar to shooting. You know, like when you direct in person, you will often have a monitor that you're looking through to see what you're shooting, right? So that wasn't different. My monitor just happened to be on a Zoom call. So you'd be looking at a Zoom, and one of the frames in Zoom would look very well lit with someone who was much better looking than the rest of us. And a normal person, you know, who wasn't looking quite as tired and ragged. And so in that sense, that was quite normal. The other thing is the kind of the acting craft, I guess, the notes about objectives and you know, intentions and all normal stuff that directors do in relation to performance. That still held fine. like that was a thing that you can do over Zoom. That's not a big deal.
Yeah.
We have quite a lot of sort of movement based scenes in the film, sort of green flashing light.
Yeah.
Which I wanted to sort of create a thing out of, you know, the limitations we had. And that was really interesting because I would be on a one-on-one call in a rehearsal with whoever it was, the actor, whichever actor it was, and we'd be doing a movement session, except I'd be in this room and they'd be in their room, and we'd be dancing around our respective spaces like lunatics. I think if anyone had looked in through my window, it would have been like, what on earth are they doing? But that's, you know, that was all part of it. Yeah, you just sort of make do and mend, I suppose. You figure out what you can and can't do and roll with it.
Yeah.
I say I've just thought of one thing, right? You know how if you do a film, and let's say you can't think of it, you've got two endings, you shot both endings, you can't pick. And so you screen two people, you get a screen, and you get people to fill out, you like this ending, or people like the other ending, and they write down what they think. Did you do the same thing for the two choices? Like, how did you show this to anyone? Because obviously, if it's non-linear, they can just watch something, and that's it. But if they're making choices in a game, is it a similar thing of you go, right, that people are going to watch that choice, they're going to watch that one, or did you get people to pick and that sort of thing? Because it must be many different ways of doing something which in a linear film is just get people in a room and they watch something and they write it down.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of this is that you'd like to think that people can choose their own thing that they want to do, right? So to some extent, you kind of don't have to worry so much about what the ending is going to be, because you have to make it satisfying, but people are going to lead themselves to the endings that they want. So that kind of thing, that goes out the window. In terms of the choice points and the decision points, we worked really hard on them, and fortunately for me, Good Gate and Wells Interactive, this isn't their first rodeo, right? So there was a lot of learning to be done there, and they were amazing at imparting their knowledge and wisdom about the interactive movie space, which is an amazing new and evolving format where we're still trying to learn how it works, what people like. You know, it's really, really new. So I think in truth, the learnings from previous projects are the ones that informed this one. And, you know, we will see how this goes and how people respond to that and what they like and what they don't like, what they understand, don't understand, etc., or relate to, don't relate to. And we will take that knowledge forward to try and do bigger and better things with it, really.
Yeah.
It's so exciting to be at sort of not the birth of a new format, because we know it's a resurgence of an old format, but in this kind of renaissance of FMV games where it's quite unpoliced. There aren't many of them, so we're kind of we're sort of making it up as we go along over here, and learning as much as we can as we go. So it's really exciting.
Only a couple more things now. First of all, have you played the game that you directed?
Many times.
Okay, and how did you do? I'm just going to ask. We've both played it. I've played it a couple of times. Corey's played it about 3 or 4 times. How did you? Do you think that it worked when you were playing it back? Did you like spot things? You were like, oh, maybe this could have been improved. Do you sort of when you were playing it yourself? How did you find it?
I think there's a bit of a curse as a director, which is that you work on something so much, you get to the point where you start seeing things that are so obscure. You know, there's an amazing podcast with someone watched Night at the Museum every week for a year. I don't know if you've heard about this. And the things they start seeing in it and discussing, and I was like, yeah, I get that. You know, we go on other films I've shot, you get, you know, a year into post-production, you go, why have we not spotted that boom mic until now?
Yeah.
And it's because you're so bored of watching it, because you've watched it for a year, that your eyes just start looking at the top right of the screen and you go, oh, there's a boom mic, and oh, there's a person in the background, and oh, that's interesting. So yeah, unfortunately, you only get the opportunity to watch something for the first time once. And that's not something you get to do as a director. So you're relying a hell of a lot on your team, people around you, the producer, Wales Interactive do some testing to see what's working, not working so well, what is working well. But yeah, I mean, I think I've done well. I know how to do well at that game. I know in principle what I need to do to win, whether I can remember to or not. Because that's the other thing that happens when you make a film. You make it and then you sort of finish it, and everything exits your head, and you go.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to a time where I can go back and play it. When I sort of forgotten enough about it that I can sort of begin to enjoy watching it for the first time.
Yeah, yeah. And final thing now, is there anything you're working on at the moment? Just to, if you can give us anything, is there anything that you've got in the pipeline, as it were?
Yeah, so we have another interactive movie in development at the moment. That's currently sort of a late stage of scripting. But I can't say much more than that at this stage.
Oh, well, that's very intriguing indeed. We thank you very much for your time, Alex, speaking to us today. So thank you very much. I'm sure Corey would like to extend his thanks also. Corey?
It's been good. It's been good. I mean,
yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It's been very nice to chat.
Yes, you're perfectly welcome.